podcast. We're going to try this live on our YouTube channel for the first time with Mike LaTulip. Mike, man, Jalen Pickett was pretty good last night as he goes for 41 points, and Penn State beats Illinois for the second time. They get the season sweep of the Illini, 93-81. They've made 24 threes against Illinois so far this year. So why does Illinois have so much issues with Jalen Pickett and this Penn State team, Mike?
Well, it is a unique matchup. And I'll stick on the defensive side of the ball because for the most part, I actually thought the offense was pretty good last night. And I think you can build on a lot of things on that end. The issue with playing a team like Penn State, particularly for Illinois, is I look at it as like 90-10. So your length and your versatility and your size, 90% of the time, that's going to be an asset for you. And it's shown to be that for them this year. The 10% of the time that it's a downside is it makes you really screenable. So when you play a team like that, when Andrew Funk's setting screens, and we know Micah Shrewsbury is a tactician. You know, he draws those things up similar to Matt Painter's, a lot of misdirection and guys screaming off a floppy action on the baseline, down screens, pin downs. And if you have guys that are a lot of times 6'6" or above, you are a bigger screening target. That's just physics. Like that's a real thing. And I think that's Matt Meyer at times. I think that's Coleman Hawkins just by way of being 6'10". It's hard as a 6'10" guy to really get through ball screens and get through down screens. And a lot of times you end up having to shortcut it. And yeah, I mean, it creates long closeouts, straight line drives. And even in transition, when you guard a team like that, if you're not tuned in to what's going on, you get so fixated on the scout where it's like, oh, it's a shooter, it's a shooter, it's a shooter, it's a shooter. Those guys are everywhere. So then your transition defense gets so spread out. So now there's these lanes to drive. And I thought there were a couple times last night where, and when I say a couple times, I literally mean, 2 or 3 times where if Dane isn't going to sprint the floor back defensively, you essentially become a 6th Penn State player setting screens on your own guys. Because there's a point blank layup that Jalen Pickett had, or maybe it was Kanye or whatever his name was.
I learned his name last night.
Yeah, so
he had a good game.
When he's driving down the middle of the floor, Ty Rodgers is doing the alley drill on him and trying to cut him off. And if Dane, you're not going to sprint and be head in the hole and get down to protect the rim, you just get in the way. So Ty Rodgers had to adjust because Dane was still sprinting by, and he's able to get a straight line drive to the basket. So little stuff like that, but I wasn't overly concerned. I mean, you had a guy last night that had 16 field goals, and I think 2 of them were layups. I know it seems like a trend with a couple of these guys with what Perkins did the other night, but sometimes you catch these players on these nights where it just doesn't matter. There were some possessions of good defense that ended in makes for Penn State, and guys just kind of fed off of that, and it grew and grew and grew. But I'll say this: it's 72-63 with about 8.5 minutes left, and Terrence Shannon's lining up for a wide open 3.
Mm-hmm.
So through all of that, you're potentially have a 2-possession game there, which I think is encouraging. You just can't let all this build. You need to be a assignment sound, like Coach Underwood talks about, and if you do that, this is going to be much more of a blip on the radar than something that I think defines this team.
I mean, you do got to tip your cap, Mike. I mean, Jalen Pickett's game was unbelievable. 41 points for 15 of 20 from the field. Only 6 free throws. Like usually when you go off for this many points, like Carson Edwards a couple years ago, it's with a bunch of free throws in it. 8 assists, 2 turns, played 39 minutes. I mean, just one of the best performances I've seen against an Illinois team, and one that's pretty good at defense. What makes him so difficult? What makes him so good?
Well, he's uber skilled. I think we know that. But it's a perfect marriage. And when you mix the tactical element that Shrewsbury brings, when you combine that with his skill set and what he brings to the table, and then you throw in the personnel around him on top of it, that's how you get games like this. And that's how you get a team that can be this potent and dangerous, is because they blend all of that together. And for him, what was impressive is what you just mentioned. Like, he wasn't just parading to the foul line. I think he shot his first free throw with like 7 minutes left in the game. And then there were just a couple touch fouls that sent him back to hit a few. But he is, he's a guy that's shooting up on NBA radars. A guy that I think a couple weeks ago was the first time I had seen his name on a draft board, and that may continue to climb because he's that skilled. And look, I think for him, you just got to say, all right, how are we going to guard him? Because the personnel around him is what makes that really difficult. And you're afraid to throw two at him because of that personnel, and you're afraid to play him straight up. And the worst place you can be is in that gray area, because that's where they pick you apart. Now, you can sell out doing one or the other. And I thought last night, for the most part, they said, we're going to play him straight up. We don't want these other guys to get loose. And you tip your cap, man. I mean, the step back he had on the right wing, he had 2 step backs over Dane for 3. It wasn't even like he was pulling Dane out, attacking, getting downhill. These were step backs. And if you're the Illinois bench, you're clapping, because that's the shot, if Dane's on him, that you want to force. Now, there's other ones that they busted some switches, a couple in the first half that led directly to him hitting some shots. And the problem is those busted switches become even more hurtful to your defense, because now he's got it going. So now he's popping back behind a screen and knocking it down. So guys like that, it's less about what's our game plan going to be. It's and I've mentioned it before. It's just, can you play with a little bit of deception defensively? And I thought Coleman did a really good job of that at times, and being a helper. Like, I'm going to sprint over and you're going to think I'm coming to trap. I make you pick up the ball. I pop back to my guy. Like, he can read that. He can pick that up. Now, there's some other guys that, the freshmen still need to pick up on that and learn that. That's going to come with time. But for a guy like Matt Meyer, it just, the hands on the knees time and time again. It's almost the majority of the time, which is just crazy. And for the people that will watch the film review, you'll see it, why it hurts you. And not just being a robot, not just saying, hey, here's the action that we went over in the scout and I'm going to follow this guy. I mean, odds are they're drawing up something to try to take advantage of what you've prepped for. That's what all these coaches do. So with Pickett, it's a tough guy to prep for, because he's so versatile, because he can do so many things. And really, you kind of are at the mercy, where you're like, we're going to force tough ones and pray to God that he misses them. And last night he didn't miss them.
I've had a lot of people say, well, Brad didn't do anything different than the last time. Mike, tell me if I'm wrong, but it felt like they did. I mean, they started with Coleman Hawkins on him. They threw Ty Rodgers on him. They did play him straight up. And you mentioned, like, the last 3 losses, they've lost. They've had 3 epic performances. Like Trace Jackson Davis, 35 points, a bunch of assists, a bunch of rebounds. Tony Perkins, how many points? 32, career high, and got to the free throw line, which was a big part of it. But I guess that's they play straight up. Like, they want their guys to be able to take that matchup and play. So what did you think of their approach to not just guarding Pickett, but Penn State?
I didn't think it was a bad approach. I think Trace Jackson Davis is a different story. I think that's one you really look at and say, maybe not. Maybe we go with throwing a couple bodies and just have him try to be a passer, and he's become a really good passer. But last night, yeah, I mean, you stuck Coleman on him. You obviously had Terrence on him in some instances, and but it turned in a lot of times when you start switching, which I think is the way to do it against them. I think you have to switch. It turns into the NBA playoffs. And when I say the NBA playoffs, it's hunting matchups. And there were times where they were hunting matchups. It was go and find Epps. Harris is out there, go and find Harris, and just kind of use your strength to back into the paint. And there was one time in the game where Epps was buried down there, but I believe it was Terrence that just was like, man, I'm going. Like, I'm just going to go. And Terrence ran down and made Pickett pick up the ball. And as Terrence is retreating back to his guy, Pickett, it's turnover. Throws it right to Terrence. So that's what I'm saying. there's not just a steady game plan where it's like, we're going to trap him every time, and because we trap him every time, he's not going to score and they're not going to get going, or we're going to play him straight up and we're going to completely shut off all their other players. It doesn't work like that. It's continuing to think the game, and it's continuing to play with deception defensively, to where if I'm the offensive player, instead of only having to process my one-on-one matchup and how far away I am from the basket and how I can score and who's open, it's bringing some element of, let's make this ball handler second guess himself. Yeah. Let's make him think one thing, we're going to do another. Like that's where, and that's on the players too in the moment to have to realize that, because guys move and now you're on the wing, you're guarding, you're one pass away, you're two passes away. And it's just actively thinking, man, like, well, how can I disrupt here? Without trying to be a hero, obviously. And that therein lies the difficulty of guarding a team like Penn State.
Mike, I want to get into some of the positives. There were some positives offensively. Penn State, not a very good defensive team, but still, you will take some of these. But one concern offensively is Jaden Epps' shooting. He is now 1 for 20 in his last 4 games. I think it's the last 8 games. He's 6 for 37. For a team that, besides Matthew Meyer, doesn't really have a reliable shooter right now, how concerning is Jaden Epps' slump here, and what do you think is the reason for his slump?
6 for 37, 1 for 20. I'm not going to say I'm not concerned. He has proven that he can make shots, but Jeremy, you know how I feel about low trajectory guys. Yeah. And what I mean by that, and I'm not sure if you had discussed this at all previously, I'm not sure we had mentioned this, but as the season goes on, your legs become an issue, right? Like there's a lot of strain. Like you've played a lot of games, and especially for freshmen, where they're probably at the point, I don't know how many games, getting to the point where you've played as many games in a season as you played in high school. Yeah. And eventually you're going to eclipse that. And what you have to realize is, as the season goes on, your legs become more important on your outside jump shot. And the margin for error becomes smaller for the guys that have flat shots, because those automatically become short. So that's Epps, that's Melendez, and that's Hawkins to a degree. And I think Coleman's done a better job these past couple of games. You can really tell he's loading up. He's getting good lift. RJ just couldn't quite get it to the rim. Epps, same type of thing, where it's kind of on that low trajectory. It's just being mindful, using more legs than you probably would want to. But the fact of the matter is he'll turn that around. You want it to obviously happen at some point where it's like before the season's over. Yeah. Because we're getting there. But yeah, not concerned with him. And he's doing so much defensively and making an impact around the rim and putting pressure, getting downhill, that the 3-point misses become less of a thing that can sink your team.
Dan commented, he said, doesn't RJ have a high arc, but it's just short a lot? Like, yeah, how would you describe the difference between those shooting slumps right now? Though RJ made one last night.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really classify RJ's as like high arc, but he probably has higher than the other two. The problem is I don't think he's shot ready enough. Yeah. So we've talked about before on the film reviews where when you catch the ball standing straight up, you got to go back down to come back up. And that introduces a lot of different variables. Whereas when you're just shot ready, like the Luke Goody, like he was last night in the right corner when Ty delivers that pass, you take that whole step out. Now you're already down. All you got to do is go up. So to me, that's RJ's biggest issue, shooting the ball. But the one thing you can never do as a shooter is have somebody sit there and be like, he doesn't look very confident. That's when you're in trouble.
Jaden looks confident still.
Jaden looks confident. And I mean, what was he, 0 for 7 last night?
Kept firing him up there, Mike.
Shoot, yeah. I mean, he's at least not scared to take him. I don't know if I think I quoted the Dion Waiters thing where he's like, I'd rather go 0 for 13 than 0 for 2 because at least I had enough confidence to keep shooting. So you want to be good ones, obviously, but I'm not overly concerned with Jaden.
Just on Luke Goody real quick, like this is kind of what I expected, Mike, right? First game, get a couple minutes. Second game, make a shot. But he's still feeling himself out like everywhere else. It's a process, right? But man, he makes that one, Mike, and I'm like, that's what they need. They need somebody who can do that, hit corner threes and not kill you anywhere else.
He's a stem the tide guy,
Yeah.
right? Like he did it against Houston last year. I think I don't know what the exact score was of the game. It was maybe like it was one of those weird like 19-10. They're a 5-0 run or 7-0 run from maybe putting this thing away, and Goody hits a 3 to make it 19-13, something like that. And he did the same thing last night, where I think it was an 8-point game, or maybe it was 27-19 or 25-19.
25-19, yeah.
And he hits a 3. I mean, that's why having a shooter like that is important, because they can stem the tide and not let these runs snowball from 8-0 to 14-0. And he does that. So we'll see him continue to build. The reality is, if Ty Rodgers wasn't a thing, he'd probably be getting more minutes. But Ty Rodgers is a thing. So I think he'll continue to grow there. And look, the decrease in RJ's minutes, and maybe there's a decrease other places depending on matchups, but Luke is definitely a guy that you can throw in there really with any type of matchup because of his size and how good he is positionally, defensively, and his ability to shoot the ball and spread the floor.
Ty Rodgers is a thing right now, man. He's their best bench player over the last month, and just the confidence we're seeing from him offensively and some of these takes to the rim and finishes around the rim. It feels like I'm asking you this every week now, which is a good thing, but what is the latest jump? Like, what is the latest step in this progress for Ty Rodgers?
Well, the latest step is where you see him being implemented in some things offensively. I think what he does defensively, but that stack action that they run to pop Matthew Meyer and Terrence Shannon out to the wing, Ty was in that last night, because you can follow with a ball screen, and he's good in ball screens. That the cross screen action out of spread on the baseline that they usually run for Matthew Meyer, they're running it for Ty Rodgers because he's so potent down there. And the baseline out of bounds play that they run for Terrence Shannon to rip with his left hand downhill, they're running it for Ty Rodgers. So his emergence, I know he was 2 points a game, 2.4 points a game going into last night. And at this stage of the season, I don't know what it is this morning, like 2.8. Like I even in a 10-point game, you don't move the needle that much. But for him his physicality, when he plays within himself, I mean, he put Pickett in the basket. He put Lundy in the basket. I mean, those are older guys, man. And he's so quick off the ground. And that helps him not only finishing around the basket, but it helps him on the glass. Because when the shot goes up, he's off the ground quicker than most guys and can get a hand on a ball and keep balls alive. And he's getting so much good exposure to drawing tough assignments in this league. This is very rarely, or is it bestowed upon you, hey, you're going to guard Jalen Pickett, right? It was Sam Griesel a couple games ago, and he's guarding a lot of good players where typically you try to hide freshmen,
right?
And that's not the case with him. And he's willing to accept that challenge. He's taken it on. I still think he's going to turn the corner at some point and not get these freshman calls. That he got another one last night, which was just Terrence Shannon does the same thing. It's not a foul, but it is for Ty Rodgers. And he's going to continue to battle through that. And that's why I said the trajectory for him, not only as a player, but defensively, is better than what it is now. I mean, that goes without saying, because he's going to continue to grow, but he's going to continue to get away with things more defensively when he's more respected in the league. That's just the way it is. Trent has that. Terrence has that to a degree. That comes with time. So I'm excited. I think this is kind of what we envisioned for him, where he's making an impact on that end. And then if he's scoring in double figures, man, and doing it in bursts like he did last night, where they kind of kept going to him. And you saw the Penn State bench just throwing their hands up because there was really nothing that you could do. And that's a pretty strong development for this team, is to have a guy like that emerge like that off the bench.
Last 4 games, 6.5 points, 7 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 1.3 steals, 1 turnover. So positive assist to turnover, 78% field goal. If you go last 8 games, he's got a couple 0 points in there. It's 5 points, 6 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal, 72%. I do think last night, and some of this offense, like, next year you got to find somebody who can do some of the things Terrence Shannon does. And you brought it up there, Mike. His ability to take it off the bounce, create for teammates. He's got that kind of ability. Obviously can't shoot like Terrence does from the outside, even if Terrence is a little inconsistent. But it gets you really excited, not only for this year, but for the future of Ty Rodgers, because we're seeing what made him a top 50 prospect was not just rebounding and defense, which he's great at. He's a good offensive player, even though he's not what I would call a shooter.
Yeah, and I think the switch to the spread helped him a lot.
Yeah.
When they were 5 out, it was harder to disguise him as a non-shooter. You really had to stick him in the short corner and put him in that little rover spot to get something out of him offensively. And now there's so much movement, and you can get him in that get action and, passing, going and getting back, coming off a ball screen, dribble handoffs. And that's where I think he flourishes, is being able to attack and get downhill and rip drive and, put you in jail. And he's such a good finisher. And because he's so explosive off the ground, his shot doesn't get blocked very often because it's hard to match that. So, yeah, moving forward, not to dive into next season, but yeah, it puts it puts the onus on the staff to say, all right, the Terrence Shannon. Yeah, I'll even say it here in mid-February. I mean, the Terrence Shannon and Matthew Maya experiments worked. It's worked, and I think it's a feather in the cap.
Say it louder, Mike.
Yeah.
I get it. It's not always consistent. There's some flaws in their games, but these two have been all Big Ten caliber players for Illinois.
Yeah, and there's a learning curve, and I think anybody that watches this season transpire probably will have more of an understanding next year if they go and address and reload in the portal that this is going to take a second. We were spoiled earlier this year because you knock off UCLA, you knock off Texas, and you can kind of have a false sense of where you're at as a team. But look, what a testimonial, I guess, as you're going through and recruiting and guys are looking at where to go and they transfer. And look at what we did for Terrence Shannon and Matthew Meyer. These are two guys that right now are on NBA draft boards, and Terrence and Matt have both undoubtedly helped their stock. No doubt. And there's guys that have gone and transferred elsewhere that have not done that. Mm-hmm. It's gone the opposite way. So, that's another element where if you can reload, and Ty is a guy that doesn't need the ball a million times. He can be who he is and have a really, really strong impact on the game no matter who's surrounding him. Yes. So I think he's a guy that if you're a transfer, look like, man, I want to play with that guy. Because not only are you going to be able to still do what you do offensively, he's going to take some pressure off you defensively, man. Yeah. And, that's huge. And that allows guys to, keep their wind and be able to perform at the level that they can. And, Ty's a big reason for that. So I'm excited to kind of see the trajectory of that dude moving forward.
Yeah. If all three of the guys that are NBA draft prospects go, which we would expect, Ty would be the next guy that I think NBA
for sure
are definitely looking at. Terrence Shannon, I want to talk real quick. 20 points, was 5 of 14 from the field. I just like the way he operated offensively last night, Mike.
Aggressive. When he's aggressive, when he's getting downhill, it really does seem like a mixed bag of how he's being officiated. You'll see different crews let stuff go, and you'll see crews like last night where he was getting downhill and it was virtually every time they were calling it and he was getting to the line. So for him, he's just got to keep doing that. Sometimes he'll get the call, sometimes he won't, but the pressure that it puts on the defense and the strain that it puts on the defense. And if nothing else, you have a chance to put guys into foul trouble, or you create long closeouts and rotations. And it was a far cry from what he did in that first Penn State game, where I thought, he was just kind of out there, and you forgot about him at times. And for Terrence, you should never forget about Terrence Shannon. And last night you didn't forget about him because he was so ever present in the way that not only he was getting out in transition, but attacking downhill, I think he had 3 or 4 steals, getting in passing lanes, and he was good, man. And look, I know it's a loss, it's a road loss, but Coleman looked great offensively. Took a couple questionable ones in the second half, or in the first half, but looked good offensively. I thought Ty looked good offensively. Terrence looked good offensively. And look, for kids that are 18 to 22 years old, when they're feeling good offensively, it just permeates throughout their game.
Mm-hmm.
It just does. That's being a young guy is about. Is like when you see stuff going in, it opens up different things. So that's why I'm not overly concerned about last night. And I trust this Illinois team more to be a team when it counts to get stops, when it matters. I think they can do that. And it's the exact feeling that I had against Rutgers. When Rutgers got off to that blistering start, I may have been texting you during the game, but I was like, I'm not really concerned because I trust this Illinois team to get stops when it matters. And they're good enough offensively to flip that around, and that's what they did.
And to be honest, the Iowa game, I felt the same way if they just wouldn't have fouled.
Yeah.
Right? Because Iowa was taking really tough shots. Rutgers was taking really tough shots and making them.
Mm-hmm.
Penn State kept making them. And I keep getting questions. We keep getting questions about why they in hard hedge, things like that, and get the ball out of Pickett's hands.
I'll touch on that because I had a couple people DM me about that. The reason why you gotta decide what you want to give up, and for probably most of the top 25 teams defensively and defensive efficiency. I did this study last year. I'd have to go and do it again this year, but I guarantee you it's close to the same. I think 20 of the 25 teams, teams that were in the top 25 for defensive efficiency play drop coverage. Like that is their primary ball screen defense. And the reason why it's so good analytically is because one of the degree of difficulty you force for the shots, they're typically tough twos. You stay out of rotation and you don't give up a ton of threes. Now, last night was a different story because of all the actions. It wasn't high ball screen stuff. It was, it wasn't like high ball screen, tag in, throw to the back action three. It was down screens. And I thought it was more a product of them getting screened last night than it was, that like you could hard hedge and also they're running actions. They're still running actions off the ball. That's just specifically ball screen coverages. And you can get the ball out of Pickett's hands, but you're committing 2 to the ball. 1, you're taking arguably your best rim protector, Dane Danger, away from the basket. You're taking arguably one of your better rebounders, Dane Danger, away from the basket. And there's too much of a downside there. And I think if you're going to hard hedge, yes, you're using your length up top and but you open yourself up for more reach and fouls. If they do get it out of there, they're not going to turn it over every single time. So when they do get it out of there, now you're in rotation. Now bad shooting teams are making open threes. Like the good shooting teams, they're going to get shots off. They're going to make them from time to time. But to me, the reason why I like the drop coverage is because it's like, we're going to give you as many 17-footers as you want. We're not going to put ourselves in rotation, and we're going to shrink the floor to this game. That's why you won against Michigan State, right? Like that's why you won against Rutgers, because you limited that game and you said, we're going to play this game in the middle third, and you're not going to get anything on the wings, and you're going to have to shoot over our length. You take your length out of the equation when you start hard hedging and all that. I know initially you have it up top, but as the possession goes on, you put much more of a strain on your defense.
Well, Mike, this was supposed to be revenge week, but Illinois can still get a big win. Indiana's number 14 in the country. That's a really difficult place to play against probably the hottest team right now in the Big Ten, and one that really punked you on your own home court a couple weeks ago with their domination in the paint and Trace Jackson Davis's game. I would imagine they have a different approach to Trace Jackson Davis, but what are the keys to this game for you?
For sure. I'd be shocked personally if they came in there and just played Dane straight up. And now there's going to be moments where that happens, where just like every good team does, they're going to try to design certain actions where they run a lot of cross screen on the baseline for Trace Jackson Davis, where they can clear out strong side, enter it, cut, and then you're having to come from the other side to trap. And odds are there's not enough time for you to come and get there before he gets to his right shoulder and shoots a left hook. So they're going to design things that are going to end up putting Dane Dainja on an island. Like, it's going to happen at some point. It's just on Dane to say, okay, you were very excited for that matchup last time.
Mm-hmm.
And, he blitzed you. And now what you can't do is come in and say, oh, like, I'm winning this matchup, and then you get 2 fouls.
Right.
Or, you have to train yourself to play within yourself and play like the tightness you should have is like, I'm so dialed in. Like, I am so locked in mentally. I'm loose physically, right? Like I can flow with it. But mentally I'm so dialed in. I know where things are coming from, and him being the 5-man air traffic control, he has to see all that. Now, the focus obviously has to be on him. I think I would be shocked if they didn't send another body at times.
No. But
the focus, although it's on TJD and limiting that domino effect that his success has, because it gets, Geronimo going, who I don't know if he's still out. I don't know if he played last game, but Galloway, these other guys that get going from Trace Jackson Davis, like, they are beneficiaries of him. You can't let that happen. So, but the other things you can't do is just say, oh, we're so focused on Trace Jackson Davis that Jalen Hood-Schifino hits 5 first-half threes like he did against Ohio State, or 6 or whatever it was. Because he's a guy that can blow this thing open too. So although you have a really good player in Trace Jackson Davis, an All-American in Trace Jackson Davis, you can't go into that game and just completely, disregard everybody else. Like, I'm looking at Galloway specifically. He had a good game in Champaign. Like, he smacked his imprint on that game. And Geronimo too. Those guys can't be the dudes that have the most floor burns, and can't be the dudes that are all over the glass and getting in passing lanes, getting steals. Like, you have to match and exceed, especially on the road. You have to match and exceed that intensity. So if they do that, if they win this game, I mean, this race, depending on what happens with tonight with Northwestern and Indiana, like, this thing gets really interesting for those Friday games, because Purdue, although they lost the other day, they're like, thank God all you guys just continue to lose. Like, Rutgers loses, Illinois loses, and then somebody's going to lose tonight between these two teams. So, yeah, I'm excited, because I really do think there's, and not to like compliment Indiana too much, but like a Saturday noon game in Assembly Hall, like, that's big time. There's something to it, man. And these guys have a chance here to kind of rise to the occasion and get a big road win.
Listen, and Illinois beat a ranked team last week. Now Rutgers has lost 3 straight, including a loss to Nebraska. But I think fans would feel better, because it's been a while since they've gotten what I would call a marquee win, Mike. Sure. Like, they've had some good wins. I mean, I still think going on the road to Wisconsin, who could be a tournament team still, is a good win. Like, they've had some good wins, but they haven't had that marquee win that makes you feel like they could make that run in the NCAA tournament. It's been a while since Texas happened, right? So basically, this is kind of an update on how you feel about this team. But if you were an NCAA tournament opponent in the pod against Illinois, what would you think of this Illinois team? What would you think about matching up against them?
It's a tough matchup. I think, and people, different commentators on broadcast have mentioned it, and they're right, where this Illinois team presents a lot of tough matchups for a lot of teams because of the versatility of their lineups. And but I also think that although when you look at the analytics and when you look at the numbers, they're a really good defensive team. I think everybody knows that. Last night would be probably a bit of an aberration, where you look at a team hanging 93 on you and just an all-time performance from a guy. But I think people also know that they have some crazy spurtability offensively. And they're starting to realize that. And like Myers been clicking for the better part of the last 2 months. You can see like Terrence has kind of gotten out of his rut that he was in January. Tyrod, the emergence of Ty, Dane's been so good down low when he's fed. Jaden Epps has been great. You see what he did at Iowa. I think you look at the collection of the guys that they have, and you're like, any given game, depending on the matchup, just like last year with Houston, where you're like, geez, congratulations, you're a 4 or 5 seed, and this is who you got to meet in the round of 32. I think there's going to be some teams. I mean, let's say Illinois falls to like a 7 seed.
Yeah.
Or I shouldn't say falls, like ends up a 7 seed. I don't know, man. That's if you're a 2 seed, you're like, shoot, we got to play these guys with like 4 guys on this team that could potentially wear NBA jerseys.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a tough matchup.
Man, around college basketball, sorry to interrupt, there's not a big difference between 3 and 7 seeds right now.
No, there isn't. And that's why I'm looking at it. There's a lot of teams across the country where, I mean, I worry about Purdue in a way where if they end up being a 1 seed, I could name a few 8-9s that could beat them. Like this is going to sound crazy, but like the one I had in my mind the other day was like, if Mizzou wins their first game and plays Purdue, like that's a really tough game for Purdue.
No 6 seed wants to see Penn State make the tournament.
No, like they sneak into that to Dayton, win a game and go. I mean, we've seen every year. I don't know. I know going into last year, I'd have to go back and check, but every year someone that wins in Dayton wins the next game. I actually don't think that happened last year because I think Indiana lost to St. Mary's maybe, and I'm trying to think who the other high major team that was in there was, but they might have lost that game too. There's a lot of teams that I think you don't want to see. And I think Illinois is on that list because although you're going to have the marquee wins, they have an opportunity for that. I mean, Saturday's an opportunity for that. Purdue's an opportunity for that. Michigan, it kind of sucks that you beat Michigan at home in a couple weeks. It's not a marquee win.
Ohio State could still be a quad 1 win.
Ohio State somehow could still be a quad 1 win. But yeah, and it's also funny looking back at last night and just being like, man, you're at the mercy of this guy dropping 41. Probably how UCLA felt against us or against Illinois. Like, he was like, I don't know. These are all just pull up, step back threes. I mean, what are you going to do? So
my whole thing is, Mike, I don't know now better than I did December whether I feel like this team's going to lose in the first round or make it to the Elite Eight. Like I can see either. Like it depends on matchups. Like getting in the tournament every year, see what happens. And this team has some talent. They have some flaws, certainly, but I just look across the country and I don't see a lot of teams that don't right now.
And look, every year we do this, and I probably said this last year on the podcast, where we do this thing where we throughout the season try to peg a certain team as, oh, that's a Final Four team. Mm-hmm. This is a Sweet 16 team. And all of that doesn't mean shit. Because eventually you're going to have your matchup. Because I truly believe that Illinois team last year was a Sweet 16 team. And they would have gone if they played any other 5 seed. Or any, like the other, I think the other 4
years ago, any other 8 seed.
Yeah, because every other team, right? If I remember correctly, if they were in any other quadrant, they would have played New Mexico State, Richmond, I believe, and one other one, right? Like maybe St. Mary's might have been in it. But yeah, like I don't know.
This is the unfair pressure of this team.
And this is what it is. And that's why I know it's probably weighing heavily, where it's like, man, we got to get to the second weekend. But look, this team could very easily have like a North Carolina type run, because there may not be a St. Peter's next year, but someone is going to ruffle some feathers.
Always do that.
Yeah.
Do that one.
But this is what happens where, if you get past the first game, and you get past the second game, now you're in that second weekend, and all the craziness that happened in the first weekend, you can benefit from that because somebody went scorched earth and a 13 seed knocked off 2 guys, and that's who you're playing.
Yeah.
And now it's a little, and I shouldn't say easier, but Yeah, it is. It is. Like for North Carolina to play St. Peter's in the Elite Eight, would they have chose Houston or St. Peter's? And they would have chose St. Peter's. So, like, I don't want to hear like, oh, they're playing with house money. Like, no, you go in there, it's a better matchup, and you take care of business. So any of that stuff can happen. It's why it's probably the best tournament in the world. Maybe some people argue for like the World Cup or whatever, but there's just so much craziness that happens rapidly at the same time. You know, this game just ended, and 5 minutes later, you're tuning over this one. We'll talk once the bracket comes out.
Yep.
I can't project once that bracket does come out, because last year I remember it came out, it was like,
it's gonna be tough.
Damn. Yeah, that's a tough matchup. So we'll see. We'll see where they end up. But I do think being in that kind of 6, if you're in that 6-7 range, your odds are you're playing a 2 or a 3. You don't have to play a 1. Crazier things can happen. So I don't know. I'm excited. I probably went on a too long of a tangent.
No, but
this tournament gets me amped, man.
Yeah, and I saw somebody comment like, I don't see an Elite 8 team for a second. I'm not going to project them to do, but I'm saying like, I can't write that off with this team. Like I've seen them be good enough, and if they get the right matchups, that's what it's about. Or if you're playing well at the end of the year, and they've won 8 of 11, right? They've still won 8 of 11 here. It's not like this team has been playing poorly. It's a good team. I don't think it's a great team. I don't know if there's a great team in college basketball.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at, if you took like a temperature check for each fan base going into the NCAA tournament, take the 2021 UCLA team, right? If you pulled their fan base, you know, they going into the NCAA tournament, they lost at Colorado, at Oregon, lost at home to USC, and then got bounced by Oregon State in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament. They lost 4 straight going into the NCAA tournament. And I guarantee you, if you pulled that fan base and said, we go into the Final Four, they'd be like, what are you smoking? We're not going. But they did.
North Carolina last year, they were on the bubble like 2 weeks before.
Same thing. And the common denominator between those two teams is they have talent.
Yeah.
It's not like this scheme that they've had to like just wring out as much as possible to try to get to the tournament. And then, oh man, we got to have some things like this team has talent. It's just a matter of matchups and how that talent plays. Because if this talent on this team, Terrence Shannon, Coleman Hawkins, you know, Jaden Epps, Matthew Meyer, Dane Danger, if those all hit at their apex like UCLA did a couple years ago with Hawkes and Johnny Juzang and Cody Riley and all those guys and Tiger Campbell, sure, this team can make a run. Absolutely. They got the talent to do it. Now it's just a matter of going out and doing it.
Or they go 3 for 24 from 3 and struggle in the first round. Like,
absolutely.
This team
that could happen too.
Mike LaTulip, great conversation, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, man.